The story of the Viltrumites Conquest is something that we are all pretty familiar with by this point. We all know that one high-ranking Viltrumite is sent to a planet. They are sent there to weaken all of the defenses and then ultimately get them to submit. This is something we literally got to see play out with Omni-Man. However, what if instead of being sent to the world that was protected by Cecil and the Guardians of the Globe, what if instead he was sent to a world that had someone so powerful that Thragg acknowledged Omni-Man couldn't do it alone? So instead of Omni-Man being sent by himself, Omni-Man went to a planet accompanied by Conquest and the Grand Regent himself, Thragg, only to realize that this was a version of Earth that was under the protection of the last son of Krypton. And that's why today we're talking Superman versus Thragg, Omni-Man, and Conquest. But before we get into anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Alright, first and foremost, we need to establish the rules for this fight. So the invincible side is pretty easy. We are only going to be using all of the feats that these characters have up until the end of Season 4. I've only read up to the comics up to that point, and to avoid spoilers, I do not want to read ahead. So all of the feats and abilities for those characters will only be taken into account up until the point of Season 4, which is okay. They all have a good amount of feats that are very scalable. And then on the flip side, with going up against Superman, the first most important thing we have to consider is which version of Superman are we going to use. So I want to go with the version that is my personal favorite, a universe that I often praise on this channel. So we are going to go with the DCAU version of Superman. Now this version, we are going to take into account his 3 seasons of the animated series, his movie, and then his appearances in Justice League and Justice League Unlimited. This way we can properly scale this character and determine just how powerful he is, and that way we can figure out how he would fare in a battle against these 3 incredibly powerful opponents. So for this battle, it is going to be set up in virtually the same way as all of the others. Superman wants to defeat these enemies. He is not going to go easy on them, and then obviously the same can be said on the other side. However, very important thing to note before anyone gets in the comments and starts saying this, I do not care that Thragg is so much more powerful than Invincible and Omni-Man. There is nothing that proves that these 3 characters would be able to fly straight through the earth and destroy it, leaving Superman helpless. That is just not going to happen. If anyone remembers correctly, the main thing that caused Viltrum to explode was not 3 Viltrumites flying through it. Yes, that helped to destabilize it. However, the main thing that initially caused it was Space Racer's laser. There was a reason that the 3 Viltrumites, who, keep in mind, were also all 3 very high-end Viltrumites, had to fly straight behind the beam because they could not have caused that much destruction on their own. And maybe I'm wrong, maybe they could have. However, we have not seen that, so I cannot be counting that as a feat. Not to mention the fact that this is a version of Superman that is fast enough. If he saw all 3 of them charging in to destroy the planet, he would be able to stop at least 2 of them, and then all you would have is one of them trying to fly into the planet, which would not do enough damage to destroy it anyway. So that is going to be one win state that we are taking off the board for the Viltrumites. However, we also have another win state that I know a lot of people are going to talk about. So I know a lot of people are going to talk about the yellow sun, the fact that that is the only reason Superman has his powers, where on the other hand, Viltrumites do not have that inherent weakness, so they could theoretically build a device to block out all of the rays of the sun, so that way Superman loses his power, right? Well, wrong. You see, this actually does somewhat happen in Superman the Animated Series, and it shows us a lot about the character of Superman. You see, there's at one point a character called Luminous does change the radiation rays from the sun. However, a very important thing to note, he doesn't just block out the sun's rays, he alters them to be like a red sun. And a red sun is what Krypton has. This is why being around a yellow sun actually gives Kryptonians powers. Their body is used to having to collect radiation and warmth from a red sun. So if in theory the Viltrumites built a device to totally block out the rays of the sun, Superman would not just automatically become depowered. In this episode where it happens in the animated series, Superman doesn't just lose his powers instantly. It's something that happens gradually. And we actually see over the course of the day that Superman still can fly. He still can use great strength, and he is still virtually indestructible. Bullets can't hurt him. And even by the time of the end of the day, he still has a decent amount of power. Now, it is very noticeable over time. However, something we need to keep in mind is not only were the yellow sun rays blocked, Luminous was also introducing red red sun rays, which was actively depowering Superman. So if in a hypothetical scenario, even if the Viltrumites were to create a device that made red sun radiation, Superman could feasibly just fly up and destroy it. He would still have the power to be able to do this, and he could create separation between him and the three Viltrumites, at least enough distance to get himself in position to destroy it. And if he is able to do that, he would be very close to the sun and absorb a ton of radiation from the yellow sun, amping him up to a degree where he could one-shot all of the Viltrumites. Another thing I know I've seen people bring up is if the Viltrumites just fly Superman so far away from the yellow sun that he is no longer able to absorb radiation. And this actually is something that is a misconception. You see, Kryptonians have the ability to store the yellow sun's radiation within their cells. It's not something that they always have to be exposed to. Again, we actually see this in another two-part episode in Superman the Animated Series. When he is captured by Lobo, he is given to a collector who collects rare species, and one of those species is Superman. And although Superman does become depowered for part of it, it is because there is an artificial red sun in his cell, and that's the only thing depowering him. However, once he escapes from the cell, we see that Superman is restored to his old self, and they are extremely far from Earth by that point, which means they are theoretically very far from the yellow sun. And yet Superman still had enough radiation stored within his cells to get back to virtually his full power. So all of these workarounds that the Viltrumites might try just objectively wouldn't work. And before anyone says, well, yeah, but if any of them get their hands on kryptonite, it's over for Superman. Yeah, you are completely right. However, where you would be wrong in this scenario, kryptonite is not easy to come by. I know a lot of people like to joke and say that everyone seemingly has kryptonite. However, in the DCAU, the only characters that ever actually have kryptonite are either associated with Lex Luthor, which in this scenario, there is no way that he would side with the Viltrumites in this situation. So I highly doubt he would give them kryptonite or even give them the knowledge that kryptonite exists. And the other character is Batman. And again, there is no way in hell that Batman would help the Viltrumites in any way. Other characters like Metamorpho would also have no reason to help out and give the Viltrumites kryptonite. And aside from those characters, there is no one else that has this easy access to kryptonite. So in my opinion, it would not be a very easy thing for these characters to find kryptonite to use against Superman. So that being said, this would come down to a straight up fight. And if we're going off feats, this version of Superman has some insane feats. I know early on in Superman the Animated Series, he is shown to be weaker. However, that is intentional. He is a very inexperienced Superman. And we find out later on that he intentionally takes more punches because it's more that his allies and his enemies don't end up having to take. This is a version of Superman who very actively holds back. We actually finally find this out in the finale of the DCAU, where he tells Darkseid that he feels like he lives in a world made of cardboard, and he always takes great care to make sure that he's not going to break anyone. Every single punch he throws has to be calculated. He can never use his full might. So as a result, we often see a version of Superman that is holding back. However, even despite this, he is still able to defeat Doomsday. He's still able to defeat Darkseid multiple times. He's still able to defeat multiple Kryptonians. He's able to defeat Bizarro. And a very important thing to note within all of these fights, Superman is made to bleed very few times in this universe. And actually, I don't believe the Viltrumites would be able to make him bleed, because when he faces off against other Kryptonians, that being General Jax-Ur and Mala, so it would stand to reason that they are, number one, pretty capable, and two, pretty strong. And he actually faces off against them multiple times throughout the series. And each and every single time, he isn't made to bleed one single time. There is not one single punch that he receives that does so much damage to him that actually causes him to bleed. When he faces a very strong character in Mongol later on, he also never receives enough damage to actually bleed. And keep in mind, this is a version of Mongol who was able to push Wonder Woman to the point where she was about to die and had to rely on a bunch of weapons from the Krypton armory in Superman's fortress. And not to mention the fact that this is actually a version of Superman that not only faced off against Doomsday, but did so without dying. He actually managed to defeat Doomsday and didn't die in the process. The only times that this version of Superman actually bled were, number one, if there is kryptonite in the situation. There were a couple times with Lex that he was actually made to bleed. However, if we take kryptonite out of the scenario, the only other times that Superman has actually been made to bleed was by Darkseid, which wasn't because of any actual physical damage that he did. It was instead because of Darkseid's Omega Beams. And if you know anything about the Omega Beams, they are so incredibly overpowered that they are shown in this universe to just straight up vaporize people at times. And yet Superman takes direct hits from these multiple times. And not only that, he is able to cover Darkseid's head as he is trying to use his Omega beams, and it creates a blast so intense that Darkseid is covered in blood after this. And yet Superman, although he is bruised and battered as well, and even a little bit bloody, he is not as worse off as Darkseid, showing us that Superman's durability surpasses that of even a new god. This puts Superman in a whole new category, and that remains to be true as the series goes on. Superman is shown to be so incredibly durable and invulnerable that it makes sense why he takes such a beating at times, because he can, and this is something that he literally states later on. And if we're also talking about speed feats, this is a version of Superman who quite literally raced the Flash. And if we're talking about just running, yes, the Flash was clearly faster. However, once Superman started to fly, he kept pace with the Flash. And over the course of Justice League and Justice League Unlimited, Superman also has some pretty insane speed feats that put his speed on the level of Flash. Now, important thing to note, I'm not going to give Superman the level of speed that Wally is able to achieve once he fully taps into the Speed Force and is able to defeat Lex Luthor. However, it is reasonable to assume, based on other things were shown in the show, that Superman is on par with Flash up until he gets that insane boost, giving Superman a speed that is comparable, if not one that surpasses that of Thragg. So that's why, in my opinion, in a battle against the three Viltrumites, it would be relatively easy for Superman to simply just fight them all straight up and defeat every single one of them. Because we also have to keep in mind that Superman also has insane hacks. He also can use heat vision, something that would definitely be able to affect all of the Viltrumites. And Thragg might be a little bit more durable to these attacks than the other two, but still, considering the fact that we've seen Superman's heat vision not only burn through Doomsday, but also burn straight through Darkseid's foot, it stands to reason that he would have no issue lasering straight through these three Viltrumites. And also something to keep in mind, as the DCAU does go on, Superman does go up against old foes from the past, one being Bizarro, but also one being Darkseid, and he is shown to be so superior to Darkseid in a fight that he is literally wiping the floor with him, to the point where when Darkseid eventually returns, he needed a power boost being combined with Brainiac to even be on the level of Superman, showcasing just how strong this version of Superman is. So that's why, in my opinion, although this would be a pretty interesting fight to see, it would be something that would end relatively easily, and I don't see that many win states for the side of the three Viltrumites, and in my opinion, Superman would be able to solo all three of them with relative ease. But I'm interested to hear from all of you. Do you agree that Superman solos all three, or do you think there's a chance that Thragg, Conquest, and Omni-Man can just overpower this version of Superman? And are there any other characters you want to see in a fictional battle? Let me know in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And I'll see all of you in the next video. Goodbye.